good morning. Today is December 10th, and we are now, I believe it's about our 10th or 11th webinar that we've done since we started in August. So, we're really happy to achieve that benchmark. For me personally, what we're about to discuss today, social impact investing, I think it's one of the most important topics around the cannabis industry. One of the things I think that has complicated this industry unnecessarily is a lot of times we look at it as though it's so much different than other industries. We don't want to apply sort of traditional frameworks in terms of how we should build it out. But even saying that, one of the things that we would be doing ourselves a huge disservice is not to embrace how we are different. And the essence of the cannabis industry is we have an opportunity to address and change certain paradigms within business in terms of how we have a sensibility about helping other people, how we respect that unique essence of what the plant brings to the table. And that's the fundamental basis around which this industry has been built. And the people who have advocated for it and brought this medicine from the dark into the proverbial light. So while on the one hand, sometimes we make it too complicated because we don't want to sort of follow some of the established methodologies and practices of business and just regulatory frameworks that apply. At the same time, and that's why this conversation for me is so important, is we can really try to dig in and understand how we don't not just have an opportunity, but a responsibility and maybe even an obligation to seize upon some of these things that make cannabis so very different and try to make something that really has a fundamental difference in how we pursue commercial, medical, social pathways with something that I think can really make a tremendous difference in the world. So I'm personally very, very, I feel honored with the people that we have on this panel. We have such a range of folks who have started from the grassroots, who represent, groups of folks who have been unduly persecuted, for want of a better term. But essentially we go from the, all the way from high finance to large commercial enterprise to advocacy and pursuing that protection of unrepresented groups. And so without further ado, I know we're having some trouble with our moderator, Firstman. So what I'm going to do is open up the floor a little bit and ask our panel. I wasn't prepared to be moderator, by the way, but ask our panelists to share some of their thoughts and what we want to cover here today. We have some really fantastic people on our panel today. So, I'm just gonna go around really quickly and make some introductions. We have Valda from True Leaf, operates in Florida, multi dispensary operation in a couple of different states. Valda, how many dispensaries do you guys have now?
Well, we're up to 5 states, and then we have a total of about almost 75 dispensaries. Okay, great.
Roz McCarthy, who's been such a wonderful support for everything that we've done with CanEx from inception. She's the founder of Minorities for Medical Marijuana, and she really works tirelessly to make her organization operate and help so very many people, particularly in the United States, but she's expanding her footprint. So Roz, thank you for joining us here this morning and all the support you've given to CanEx over time. It's really appreciated. Ika Washington, who's relatively new to me. I met her last year. Was it last year or this year, Ika?
I think it was the year before, but
okay.
Yeah.
But Ika does is Diversity Talks is the name of your organization?
Yes.
Yeah, and she advocates and puts structures in place for helping to sort of. Firstman, you're unmuted, sir, as you work out your technical difficulties. Remember, it's CanEx Jamaica. So you got to understand that we got to give that little asterisk and that flow because everything's going to be all right because we're in Jamaica. Matt Nogren from Arcadian Fund. Hold on, I think I can mute him. Let me see. Can I mute him? Asher, can you mute him? Asher or Dave, can you mute Firstman until he's organized? Matt, welcome. Again, someone who's been very, very supportive of what we're doing here at CanEx. Welcome to this panel.
Hey, Doug, thanks for having me. Happy to represent Arcadian here, and also good to see my friend Steve. Miss you, buddy. We usually don't go this long without seeing other human beings, and our community really misses each other. But yeah, glad to be here. Hopefully, can provide a little bit of perspective on this particular topic from a finance seat. We run a investment fund, and we're involved with about 45 companies to date. So it's a very important topic to us, one that I mean, Steve and I've talked about for a while now, and really have appreciated what Steve's meant to the state. We want to bring that from the finance perspective. How do you implement these ESG principles when you're doing deals? How can you bake them into the structure? How can you hold yourself accountable as a firm, and how can you hold your companies that you're involved with accountable for certain things? And we're really trying to figure that out, and having a lot of fun doing it.
Awesome. Steve, it's always a pleasure to have you. Thank you for all the support you've given to us as an organization, the insight, advice, and perspective you provided me as I sort of try to ramp up my cannabis understanding over time. So it's a pleasure to have you here. Those of you, I don't even need to introduce Steve. Everybody on this, I'm sure, is very familiar with him. But despite the number of different hats that he wears, from early advocate all the way through to his corporate ventures, I think more than anything else, Steve has to be recognized and saluted for the tireless job that he has done to move this industry forward and really fight in the beginning when it wasn't cool. There wasn't a pathway forward that we all thought had a progressive end to it. He fought really in the shadows when we didn't know what the outcomes might be. So Steve, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today again. And I salute you for all the tireless work you do in helping to support and promote cannabis ventures and the cannabis conversations to move this industry forward. So welcome.
Thanks so much for the kind appreciation, Doug. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody.
Awesome. And Barbara Blake Hanna, what a wonderful lady. And Barbara, it's a real pleasure to have you here with us today. You have a really, I love your passion. Barbara keeps me honest. Barbara tells it exactly like it is. If she thinks that CanEx has done something that we should not have done, or we should have done in a slightly different way, she minces no words to tell me. And I have to say that our goal has always been to be a world-class organization. And while we strive to get there, we also embrace and understand that we will not get there if folks don't keep us honest sometimes when we don't necessarily perform to the level that we need to perform. So Barbara, I appreciate you. I thank you for all the tremendous support you've given to our organization, the critical feedback you provided to me so we can be better. And again, for the work that you have done in advocating for respect, appreciation, and progress in the cannabis industry, particularly in light of some of the unfortunate things that happened here in Jamaica, and the work that you've done globally to sort of to speak to that. So welcome and thank you for joining us this morning. It's a real pleasure to have you.
Blessings and love, and good morning to everyone. Thanks so much for having me here, Douglas. Blessings.
Absolutely. Firstman, are you in gear? Are you ready to rock and roll, sir? You're still muted, but you're coming into this like a big celebrity, like we have to do the big reveal for our moderator. You're muted. Are you ready to go? All right, so while we still figure that out, I'm going to throw this first question out. The question of investment and social impact investing and what that means from both the investor side, whether that's a fund, whether it's a larger company that's looking to support smaller enterprises, and what that looks like from the smaller entity, aka entrepreneur, aka potential recipient of those funds. So we have a lot of, I wouldn't call it tension, but there's a lot of disconnect in terms of how do those things come together in a manner that properly equips that entrepreneur, or that smaller entity to be successful, and at the same time provides not just a financial return, but a degree of comfort and that sort of doing the right thing sentiment from the company that's being asked to invest in those organizations. And I would love to hear perspectives from everyone on this, but I think, if I may, I'm going to ask you, Roz, to first speak to, from that smaller investor looking for funding, that sort of mindset, what they're looking for, what some of those gaps might look like. And then I'm going to jump to you, Matt, to ask you from a fund perspective, what you look for. Ika and Steve, we had a wonderful conversation about this yesterday. So, it's the challenge sometimes with the pre-webinar talks is how do we bring that back into the actual webinar to make sure we get the value and the benefit of that conversation. But I have great confidence that we'll be able to do that. So without further ado, Ross, would love to get your thoughts and perspective.
Yes, I am on mute. All right. So thank you, Douglas, for having me on. Thank you to CanEx webinar folks, your support team, and of course my esteemed panelists. I'm on with you guys. I know you guys. I love you guys. I appreciate you guys. I'm like Nat. I wish I could be there to hug. But anyway, to answer your question, Douglas, I think we talked yesterday and we got so deep in the conversation. And the issue at hand is that when you're talking about the businesses who are lacking investing or lacking funding, I look at it as two different challenges. Challenge number one is, are you prepared to be able to introduce your company? Is your company prepared to be able to have that conversation with an investor who's going to be really wanting to make sure that you are understanding what that investing relationship means? Something yesterday that stuck out in my opinion that was said was that investors are not your friends. Investors are someone that are looking for a return on their investment. They are looking for business opportunities. And I think sometimes with the smaller up and coming businesses, and more importantly, the minority, the Black-owned, brown-owned companies who are just now getting into the industry, we don't understand the makeup of what the investor is looking for and how to present ourselves. And so I think that opportunity to create, I don't know if you want to call it boot camps, if you want to call it, accelerator programs, but basically, being able to make sure that you're prepared and understanding the different opportunities for funding of projects. And, and one of my big things is that, investing doesn't always have to be dollars initially. Investing, if you are a corporation, a multi-state operator, someone who is a cannabis entrepreneur who is an investor, it could be investing some of your time, your influence, your some of your experiences to these companies who really are starting from scratch. And I think we just have to kind of level have the conversation about what's the entry point for these companies who are looking for funding, because sometimes they're not entering into this opportunity at the same place. They're starting at a very elementary level and working up from there. And Matt, that may transition into your conversation from an investor, what you see in regards to what your expectations are when you're looking to invest into a company. There are some expectations that you're looking for, so that's a great transition into that conversation.
Well, I appreciate that, Roz, and well said. This is an important topic. ESG principles, environmental, social governance, and these are things that have been trying to be addressed properly for a long time outside cannabis, long time before this conversation. And then, frankly, I don't know that financial institutions have figured it out perfectly before. I think we see that in society today. And but the opportunity here is to build an industry from the beginning where you put those in from their foundation, while every other industry is trying to reverse engineer themselves and figure out how to actually care about the world. And so you have to bake these into your investing principles. The old line of thinking was that it didn't matter. It was X's and O's. Is it better? Is it cheaper? That's how you used to sell things. That's not the world we live in anymore. You can see it in the capital sourcing. As an investor, one of the things you're trying to do ultimately is understand the psychology of the marketplace. And that's what the public markets represent. It's a psychology. And, you know, the psychology is changing. There are principles that psychology is bringing to investing that didn't exist before, because younger investors, as money transfers to the younger generation and wealth transfers, the younger generation cares. They care more. It's not just, is it better or cheaper? Is it better for the environment? Does it help on with animals? I mean, there's all these principles that I think we don't talk a lot about, but I think they need to be kind of brought up. Energy use, waste, pollution, natural resource conservation, treatment of animals. I mean, there's all these topics that in other industries, it's very difficult to reverse engineer from. But in our space, because when you understand ultimately the markets, the psychology of investors is changing, these ESG principles are now being baked into emerging industries. And I think you're going to see the convergence of that here in the next decade as that mentality starts to shift. So as investors, it's not just dollars and cents. It's not just, you know, does the business make sense? Yes, it's the management team. Yes, it's the timing. Yes, it's IP. Yes, is it capitalized? But there's a bigger question now. And I think that as a manager in this industry, we're really trying to bring that in and build it into the fabric of the companies that we're investing in and building, so that it transfers. Because it's nice to say, it's great to talk about, and we all believe in these things, but how do you actually make it happen? You have to bake it in, and you have to let them know that the markets are expecting that as they get to be market potential companies. So it's very important to us, Doug. I'm so glad you asked about it. But I'll pass the baton now by saying it's an evolution. It's a learning process. We have to challenge ourselves to continue to listen and continue to change and continue to do better, because there's just not, it's never going to be enough. We can always do better for people and for this world. And as an industry, you know, we have a great responsibility to show that off right here.
Thanks, Matt. I'm gonna switch to, I'm gonna ask you, Ika, from the perspective of the, you know, the entities and the individuals who come to you that are looking for this type of funding. What do you see as the gaps that they have in order to better present themselves to potential sources? Or if you think they're ready, but the sources are not looking at it through the lens that we all think they should be, you know, what does that disconnect look like? And before you comment, Matt, I just want to say, like, I think as part of this narrative, however we can get to it, there's the part that is, how do we achieve that theoretical, you know, wonderland, right? And I don't say that to take away from the potential reality of it, but what we have today is people who want to start a business today, right? They're passionate about it. They want to deploy in it today. And what you've just spoken to is, I think, what most of us who are in the industry want to see happen. We want to see these sorts of, we want to see this mindset that says we're different. We want to see a mindset that says we want to respect the planet. We want to see a mindset that says, let's not jump into this to say, you know, I can make an extra penny by not doing this or cutting this out, right? But how do we reconcile that difference to those people today who are saying, I want to get in, when, again, I don't want to call it a euphoric type of positioning, because I think it is attainable, but it's so far away from where we are today that how do we enter today while we build a mission to get to where you're speaking of tomorrow? Right. So I just want to throw that out there as a general thought, because I think there's some much better perspectives from you guys on that. But Ike, back over to you in terms of what you see from a pragmatic perspective, a practical perspective, from people who come to you today and entities that come today, and the seeming disconnect with the sources of funds.
Yeah, so I think there's an issue where there's not enough knowledge sometimes within the grassroots communities or with community support in terms of understanding the corporate world. And I think that comes down to a lot of underserved populations. They don't have that financial literacy and it's not provided to them. So it's honestly one of those things where they kind of learn by trial and error. And sometimes they learn, and it's just one of those experiences where it may just deter a lot of investors, even if they have great ideas. So a lot of the community groups that I've worked with or have seen their decks, and I'm just like, if I was an investor, and I think I was explaining to you guys yesterday, was if when I saw their decks, I was like, if I was an investor, and I'm not math at all, but if I saw that, I was like, I mean, it's a great idea, but I don't think it's attainable. Like, I don't see an ROI. Like, what do you want from it? There's a lot of missing pieces. So I think that there's an aspect of also financial literacy that needs to be added to working with community groups, and especially like if you're going into environments like Jamaica, it's understanding the population and what does that financial structure looks like. What does financial literacy look like from the community level, the individual level, and how can we support them? Is it through community learning, teaching them how to do pitches? Is it teaching them how to actually build out a structure that an investor like the corporate world wants? So in terms of the work I do is giving them that bridge in terms of code switching and saying, you can be original, you can come with these ideas, you can be grassroots as possible, but you need to understand that corporate speaks a corporate language, which is very capitalistic. Even if it's something that you're against, you have to understand this is what the system is, and you have to play by somewhat the rules, but at the same time, keep true to yourself and who you are. But at the same time, you have to play corporate. You have to give them what they want and make them understand if you have to be flexible. I think it was Roz yesterday where you said something powerful, and I actually wrote it down. You said, what are you willing to give and what are you willing to give up? And I think that is the biggest, sometimes the missing puzzle piece when working with the corporate. And they have to also understand that when you're working with grassroots, they may not have the amount of knowledge that you would think that they would have, that you would get from other corporations when you're working with them. So it's learning into being accessible and understand equity. That is what equity is. And that's, being able to understand where people's levels are at and trying to meet them halfway, or at least give them the resources they need to get to that level in order to work with you or work with you. There you go.
And
Thanks,
even, Douglas, just right quick, and even setting the expectation of what does equity mean, and when you go into a deal, understanding how to communicate in that deal and how to negotiate that deal, and what what the expectation of funding and getting funding and how much you have to give up. I think sometimes our community and our small businesses don't understand that. So I just wanted to, I thought your points were great, and I just wanted to add that little bit.
So first of all, I want to say, yeah, Barbara, please jump in. I was really going to say,
first of all, I listened this morning to the discussion yesterday. I listened to the recording. And once again, I thought that this would be, I didn't realize this was going to be another financial seminar. And that's what it is. The issues are all about money. But we have a little habit in Jamaica, everything, we always start everything with prayers. Meetings and businesses, we always start with prayers. It's like you got to bring God into the beginning for it to go well. So really, the ganja business, it's like Jamaica has given up its inheritance. We inherited a pole position globally. We were the most famous ganja industry in the world. What we did here, what the Rastas did here, gave everybody the guts, the balls to go ahead and do the same in their territories. And my speech today is about the sacramental purpose of the herb, the sacramental basis of ganja, which is what we the Rastas always used it for, sacramental first. And the financial part was so that we could continue existing, so that we could continue living to praise our Jah. I think we inherited, as I said, the pole position, and we kind of handed it over to the money people. We said, okay, well, you're bigger, you have money, you're better off than us, you take it and run with it. and they've taken it and run with it. But here we are, you know, what, 5 years since it was legalized in Jamaica, since the new law was written. And the question is still being asked right here this morning. How do we go about it? How do we get investors? How do we persuade? How do we teach new people how to speak to the investor? And suddenly the money man has become the most important person in what we're trying to do. But maybe if we had put, you know, the prayers, the God, the sacramental at the beginning of what we were doing, we would have a blessing under which we could function. And, you know, I really am a Rasta, you know, I'm sorry, I'm proud to say, because I found that blessings do come from prayers.
They do.
I
They
exist,
do.
you know, here am I going into my 80th birthday, and it's only prayers and blessings why I'm here, you know. It's definitely not money. It's definitely not money. So my contribution to you, and Douglas knows this, my contribution to this industry from the beginning, and I speak here on behalf of 3 Rastas who are no longer with us in person: Sister Sandra Alcott, Brother Dennis Forsyth, Brother Rasta Silva, who from the 70s, when I, as a brand new trying to be a Rasta, came in to try and legalize it so I could legally smoke it. These were the people who were first fighting for ganja, for our sacrament. And I'm here again, you know, all these years later. And the only thing I can say, the only contribution I can make to this meeting is to say, remember the sacrament. Remember the sacramental purpose of the herb. I am a Rasta, and I say it again, it's us, it's our red, gold, and green. It is us that have made everybody here sitting down here be comfortable to be sitting here. And I say, remember the prayers. We didn't say prayers yet, so I give thanks to the Most High, Jah Rastafari, and to his son, Jesus Christus, why I am here, sitting here today. One love, blessings. But don't talk. I don't need to say nothing more today. Love you.
One love, Miss Barbara. So this is Valda.
One love.
Yeah, although I am here in the United States in Florida, my roots are in the Caribbean. My dad was not a Rasta, but he was a roots man, as I call him, right? And so I have long honored plants. I talked about this on another CanEx webinar. But what you're speaking to, I think, is not unusual to what I call some things that have been here since the beginning of time, right? That served a greater purpose, but of course now are being monetized. You know, I'll use mangoes, right? Before working in cannabis or marijuana, I was working on mangoes, and I thought it was just a fruit that everybody knew. And there's a whole industry around that. The US Department of Agriculture, right, monitors everything that comes into the United States, et cetera. So I'm certainly speaking perhaps more from a US centric point of view, but I think what I'm excited about was, and I also listened to the recording yesterday, is the possibilities of all of us, right, including you and Firstman and Roz and Matthew and Steve and Ika and everybody that's here. What do we want to create going forward? You know, what channels of access, maybe, you know, what new thinking, and it's not just about the money, right? But what new thinking can we bring to the market? I only represent one company, but certainly just as I'm on this panel, I'm meeting people from all parts of cannabis. And there's a grassroots community here in Florida too, right? And when I can tell you, they're very loud, they're very vocal. A lot of them want home grow, right? Imagine that. We are friendly with a lot of people we as a company in Florida, with people who, and we support them wanting to grow their own. So it's not just about us making money, it's about the accessibility of it to more people. You know, and I think that there is opportunity, perhaps, if we have the right people with the right consciousness, right, in these companies to really bring about change. And I think although we know that this is something that is common in other industries, this one, at least from a business structure standpoint, is fairly new. So we actually have a great opportunity, I think, to shape it going forward. So I you know, I have some more thoughts and so forth, but you know, I think it's definitely not too late.
Steve, I want to bring you in, particularly around some of the things we talked about yesterday, and this bridging this gap between the small operators and the larger entities. But Barbara, I do want to say, I said it in the beginning, and you did it here publicly for me. Is I will take the rap on the knuckles as far as starting the webinar as we did, just jumping straight in, and it's something I'm going to take going forward. I think when we had our very first CanEx in Jamaica, it was a last minute addition, but I can think of nothing that more powerfully set the stage for ultimately what we wanted to represent as an organization, and that was when Firstman started with a traditional prayer and the drumming and that sort of thing. And so again, I'll take the rap on the knuckles. We could have done this one-on-one. But anyway, because you're absolutely correct. As far as you're concerned about this particular conversation being anchored and focused on finance, that's not the purpose. That's where we've started, yes. But that, so I'm just going to say, stick around and keep your ears open a little bit, because you'll see as we transition from how the pre-webinar discussion went. This is just one little aspect. And we want to tackle this and move forward because there's some much more interesting and captivating elements to the discussion we had yesterday that I want to bring to the fore. And the real person to lead us in that is really Firstman. But before we give him his grand entrance, late to the party and making that impression, Steve, I want to bring you in and just touch a little bit about some of the things we discussed yesterday vis-a-vis this particular aspect of the discussion.
Well, thanks, Doug. I'd be happy to touch on them. I just want to first speak to Barbara's points. For better or worse, I'm probably one of the main people that could be blamed or credited for bringing the money people into cannabis. And the reason that I did that, it was back right after Obama got elected president. I figured we had 4 or 8 years maybe to push the ball of reform so far down that they wouldn't be able to roll it back, because I knew it was after Obama was going to be ugly. and so I figured that if we made cannabis legalization work for the investor class, then the investor class would make the politicians make cannabis legal. And I think that that's worked pretty spectacularly. But now, we're in this phase, which is really a battle for the soul of the cannabis industry. And the essential question is whether the corporations are going to corporatize cannabis more, or whether we will be able to cannabize the corporations more. And so I welcome your reminder, Barbara. And I think, I'm not a Rasta, but I have always considered cannabis my sacrament. So I'm kind of a Rasta cousin. And now, for me, the main task moving forward is creating an industry that's consistent with the lessons that the plant teaches us.
Thank you.
Speaking to the gap, there's I think that Ika's points around financial literacy are really important. I think also it's important for investors who want to engage with traditional cannabis cultures to educate themselves about the cultures that they're engaging with. But I think there's also a structural gap, and Matt, you might be able to speak to this. What I've learned is that there is this whole class called ESG investing. And these are investors who are specifically looking to make a positive social impact in the world. I've engaged with them now enough to learn that most of them, the vast majority of them, are not interested in startups. They want a company to come to them with 2 or 3 years record of actually working in a way that's consistent with ESG principles. So there is a gap there, because the money that is available for startup companies is the angel investor community. And these are investors who perceive, and generally throughout investment, startups are perceived as the riskiest investments. And because an angel investor might make 10 investments and only 1 or 2 or 3 of them might turn out well, they might lose money in all the others, they are always looking for a big return, and preferably a big return pretty quickly. So there's this gap. The money that's most commonly available to startups is money that wants to make a lot of money and wants to make it pretty quickly. The money that is available for ESG type companies and ventures generally doesn't come in until year 2 or year 3. I think that what we need in this industry is a fund that will address that gap. I'm not a fund guy, but Matt is, and maybe you have some comments on that, Matt.
Well, Steve, thanks for bringing that up. We are talking about that as we speak. There is a gap that in the early days of cannabis, and the early days are different for different people, but let's just call them the early finance days, 2010 to 16, angel investing was a little more prevalent. You know, Steve, you were involved with ArcView and some other great places that allowed these entrepreneurs to get together and investors. It felt like that was the stage. The industry has matured now. And so there is that gap. There's the gap between kind of, you know, growth equity investing and true angel investing. And if we don't pay attention to the angel investing side, we're going to miss out on a lot of opportunity for this industry, for this sacrament to be where it needs to be. So Steve, I couldn't agree with you more. In our new fund, we're closing a very large fund. We have a portion of that fund that's going to be totally dedicated to startup investing. And we're bringing somebody in just to focus on that, because if you lose that element, you really do lose the heartbeat of this thing, Steve, as you were talking about and Valda was talking about. And, you know, Barbara, at the end of the day, this is kingdom building. There's only a finite amount of resources on this planet, whether it's money or commodities or whatever it is. At any moment in history, there are certain people charged with a responsibility to kingdom build. And that means you get as many resources as you can, because we're, you know, timeless beings in a timed experience. It's just going to pass on anyways. So I think this industry, and, you know, Steve, by bringing this industry into the finance world, as long as we invest with the right principles and help build companies when they're small until they get bigger, this can change the world. It really is a kingdom building opportunity to take as many of these resources as we can and turn them to good things, pass them on to good things. Somebody has to do it, and this is the time for us to do it.
I like that phrase, kingdom building. I like that, yes.
All right, blessed.
Firstman, welcome. I'm gonna hand the mantle over to you. We've talked a lot about on the investing side already, to the point where Barbara has wrapped me on my knuckles, and we shouldn't talk about it too much more. But what I would love to ask you to sort of transition us into a little bit now are some of the social considerations that we discussed yesterday. So over to you, sir. Welcome, and that's it. Firstman, you there?
No, I'm apologizing. Well, I don't know. The internet is not my. Yeah, Matt, you're not hearing me? You're not hearing me?
You know.
We are now, yeah. We are now. So wherever you are, stay right there.
Okay. All right. So it's just a pleasure to be here to share this information and this journey. And I guess from what I'm hearing so far, I've seen where a lot can take place once there is this partnership between government and community. For the Rastafarian community, in particular, there are a lot of points that that have gone on before, which are very important discussion points, which is basically what's the financial education of a community when you want to start to deal with investors. And in particular, the decriminalization of the sacrament in Jamaica, in particular, that sort of gave an opportunity because the government actually wrote in law in that amendment what Rastafari entitlements were. It simply means that the first event we did was with I-Times, and you know, there were expertise amongst us, lawyers and so on, that assisted that process. So we got a baptism like immediately the same year the amendment was made, we went straight into business mode of trying to put spiritual and material together. So we have been on a very intricate journey, and that doesn't pave the way for the world, but it is an example that we could really look at, because we just had to grow up. Everyone was coming into Jamaica, and the investors were facing the exact same problems that we are talking about right now. As to, you know, I was explaining to you that, you know, you went to CanEx and it's an unfair conversation to be having in the communities. And really and truly, what we then would have to do is to look at how do we take these steps forward. And looking at different, what we would call income streams within the cannabis industry, as it relates to the stories and the development plans and so on and so forth. I think that is where we will have to try to extract how can communities participate from where they are. And, you know, we were paying very keen look to what was going on in California with the community development groups, incubator type system, where you could say if there are a few professionals, you know, you can work with a community from where they are and see how best you could develop them and convince them into certain levels of standards and so on. But then if that is not going to be a government partnership, then you really have to be looking at the investors to do this. And, you know, investors are, especially in the climate of Jamaica, where some of the problems is they come with the money, but then everything in Jamaica is so much different from how it is in their world, in the sense that how they expect things to work, you know. You hear people complaining about the regulatory system, and it's just
Firstman, maybe you can try turning off your video.
It's costing them money. You know, so what are the challenges that people are facing from the industry? It's only if the cannabis industry that is better. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, so it's only if the cannabis industry takes this responsibility ourselves. And Valda and everyone's CanEx, and we use all of these other forums to really identify our own problem and try our best to solve them ourselves. To me, it's the only type of conversation.
So if I can jump in here, Firstman, you're breaking up a little bit, but what I did want to throw out to the panel, and I hope you can get to a place with a little slightly better connection, because I think this is a great point to bring in some of the things we talked about yesterday. And from a very, you know, 2020 has been an incredible year. You know, we've seen Black Lives Matter, we've seen the conversation elevated to a whole nother level of doing the right thing, right? And when we talk about this opportunity, to your point, Matt, of what the cannabis industry can do, because we have a blank slate and we have a different dispensation to sort of other industries. Are we doing enough? And I like the word Firstman's talking about when he says we, and he talks about the industry, because I think we have to do better and we have to do different. And so the question becomes, are we doing better? And if we're not, how do we start to tackle that? How do we actually start to tackle that and move some of this from, you know, theoretical conversation into practical steps and practical thoughts where we can introduce a degree of accountability? So, you know, I'm going to ask the question, you know, Matt, how are we doing and how could we do better? From a social perspective, from the perspective of saying, look, yes, Black and minorities have been unfairly impacted, right? We still have to create real enterprises with real talent behind them to make them work. But how do we actually now do the right things to make sure as an industry, we're more aware and we're taking the steps?
Well, it's a great question. It's a big question. You know, I think that we just need to keep listening. because the answers are there. The answers in life are always there if you're going to pay close enough attention to them. And this past year has given everybody a moment with which to be a little bit more present, and hopefully hear more. And a lot's been said this year. And I think that we have to pay attention to what the world is yearning for. And so to how do you have to, and then we talked a lot about this to our entrepreneurs, how do you put up a scoreboard for this? Because people generally want to do the right thing, but how do you put up a scoreboard that everybody knows they're doing the right thing? And that's what we're working on. It's a long conversation, but as Steve mentioned earlier, it's really based on these ESG principles. If you look at the size of capital that's out there right now that's dedicated for ESG principle companies, and it's a long list of things, it's been growing at such a crazy rate over the last decade or two. Every year, more money than ever is flying into ESG backed investment, mandates, yet less companies are meeting those mandates than ever before. And that's because there are old industries, if you will, that haven't been able to figure it out. They can't reverse course as quickly as they need to. This is a white space. And so I think what we get to do is implement these ESG principles from the beginning. It's a long list of things, Doug, and I'd be happy to, provide anybody here the checklist of things we go in diligence. We go through them. We ask people to answer certain things about the way they feel about the industry. What is their responsibility to the industry? Things that aren't just quantifiable. We want to understand entrepreneurs' thought process, because there's a lot of work that we're responsible to build in to think about populations that have not been treated so good over the years. And I have to say, this conversation right now is so empowering to me. I feel so fortunate to be able to finance this industry and its entrepreneurs, but to listen to Barbara and Roz and Valda, and Ike and Steve, you almost feel like this conversation is an evolution from the plant's, origins, if you will. And then you're seeing it kind of be brought through Barbara's spirit and Firstman, and then Steve kind of bringing it into America. And then, people like Ike and Valda and I are coming in, and Doug's doing it. And here we are. This is what we all wanted. We wanted to get this sacrament to the world, as many places as it can be, in as many forms as possible. That's botanical wellness is what we need to have happen. But we're in it together, and it just is so damn encouraging to feel like I get to play a role in this. And we all have a big responsibility, Doug, and I can promise you this year is only made us stronger. Get ready for 2021. We are so strong right now. We're listening to the industry, and we know what we need to do, and we're doing it together, man.
Can I throw in a thought here, Doug? I think you were asking how, right? One of the things that I always look at my life, right? Leaving the Caribbean, little tiny island, coming to the US, and then playing in a lot of different worlds. Oftentimes I see silos. So I think the need that is out there is about bridging those gaps. People literally are functioning almost in their own, I'll call it like bubble. I used to joke, right? There's a class of people that are so wealthy, literally they go from one location in a luxury vehicle, let's say, to first class in the airport, to a particular part of the plane, to fly to a certain destination that probably they don't see the majority of the people, right? In everything in between and where they land. So imagine that you're like living your life and you've never interacted, right? When I go to any country in the world, I typically jump in a taxi cab. Sometimes they say it's dangerous.
Yeah.
And I ask them to take me to where they eat.
Yeah.
Don't take me to where you take the usual tourists. I want to go where you eat. And I have to tell you, every place that I've done that, I've had some amazing food, right? But I also got to see the real people. And so when I say that, and we talk about, in the indigenous origins, the Rasta origins, all of that, I just think that there are worlds that people are operating and there's not a whole lot of crisscross between those people. So how we make this happen is through organization. CanEx is one, but I think we need others, right? So Ika, when you're talking and you're meeting all of these folks, my education and my experience is very traditional. My family wasn't corporate, but that is the path that brought me forward, right? After I finished school. And there's a lot that I've given back over the years in terms of knowledge transfer. So, you know, you don't have to go get an MBA for me to give you kind of a marketing 101 on, you know, who's your target market, what, you know, all of these things. So I think we probably need some organizational structures that will help the cause, the effort in terms of skill transfer, right? And then borrowing from back and forth from each other. So as much as I may be able to give some of those traditional business disciplines, somebody else like Barbara or Firstman could maybe help us understand the heart, right, of the industry and how might that play in changing mindsets, because there's still stigma as well, right, around it. So where the industry is not fully moving forward and everyone's not free really, because some people are still against it, afraid of it, whatever. So it's about organization, I think, breaking down the silos, making introductions across those silos and pathways to be able to make opportunities, to create opportunities for people.
I would
So,
definitely agree with
yeah,
Valda.
I just want to say, open it up, guys. Whoever wants to jump in, jump in. Go ahead, Barbara.
I really came in to congratulate you, Douglas, because what you've done with CanEx is created a really good forum for the people of change. You set yourself, you put Jamaica right in the beginning of the most powerful organization that's discussing the most important issues to do with cannabis. And you are to be congratulated because it hasn't been easy and you've been consistent. Well done. I'd like to point the
Thank you, Barbara.
no, it's true, darling. It really is true. We have to become a melting pot, mixing all of it together. And it's good to hear Matthew use that phrase, kingdom building, because it is a kingdom. It's a righteous kingdom we must build. We mustn't let it be just a financial building like most industries are. It's all just about money and who can make the most and the hell with everyone else. No, dealing with industries that have a conscience, a social conscience, an ecological conscience, where money is to make the world better, not to, you know, provide another first class ticket for another set of people in their limousines. So, you know, yes, keep going. I love it. This conversation gets better every minute. Trust me.
So a rap on the knuckles and then a little hug. Thank you, Barbara.
I'm the mama here.
So Doug, thinking about,
yeah,
just to get to your 2 points quickly. One, how are we doing? We're going backwards. Now that you see a lot of larger money coming into the industry rather than angel investors, what you're seeing is, and we know this statistically, is a diminution of diversity in the industry. We know that there is less diversity on corporate boards, corporate cannabis boards in the state of California now than there was 3 years ago. So we are going backwards. How do we deal with it? I think that look, corporations are corporations and they come in different flavors, and there is this big pool of ESG money. But at the end of the day, corporations are there to make a profit. They're there to make as much money as they can, the vast majority of them. And I think that for the rest of our lifetimes, that's probably the way it's going to be. So what we need to do, if we want an industry that's really does march by the lessons that this plant teaches us, is have a very, very well-educated cannabis consumer base all around the world that holds the feet of the cannabis corporations to the fire of justice, to the fire of our spiritual and sacramental connection to this plant, and to the fire of the greater mission that we're all being called to through ganja.
I think the accountability factor, and I didn't mean to cut you off, but you know, during the George Floyd tragedy, earlier this summer, I started a change.org because I felt like this was the issue that was so central to our to the Black community, and it wasn't just George Floyd. And I was just so I just couldn't believe the cannabis community, some of these executives, some of these board members weren't speaking out and saying in solidarity of a community that was hurting, that needed embracing. And then we started the change.org. We got over 10,000, almost 20,000 signatures or what have you. And we saw different companies come out and make these pledges and come out with these statements and what have you. And, I just put it out there now, we created a program with MCBA called, how do we dismantle systemic racism in cannabis? Because there is still systemic racism in this industry, as my earpod, sorry. There is still systemic racism, not only in our country, but also in this industry. And I guess what I would just say, piggybacking on what Steve just shared, is we have to be honest about what the industry is presenting right now, and really call people and to be held accountable. And when folks say, well, I don't know what to do, there's resources to point companies and corporations in the right direction in order to have a more diverse and inclusive industry. And it's not just from a business ownership. I'm talking about from the inside, from the executive to the board, but also, Steve, it's at the mid-level, it's the mid-tier level, it's the entry level. I've seen some cannabis companies that you walk in, you would be hard pressed to find a person of color in the whole entire company, from the start all the way up to the top. That's unacceptable. And we know that to be the case, and it's unacceptable. So I challenge the companies and the corporation out there, don't jump on the community bandwagon and give us a letter of statement of solidarity and not do the real work that you have to do afterwards to make sure that you're holding yourself and holding the industry accountable.
And I guess my point is to kind of piggyback on everything that everyone says. So I come into rooms when it comes to cannabis as a Black woman, but I'm also Jamaican background in terms of ethnicity. And when I go into rooms, I make sure that I hold organizations accountable. What are your core competencies? What are your cultural competencies? Do you have standards and set within your organization to make sure that you're reaching out to the communities, you're engaged, you have educational tools for your employers, your employees? Does leadership understand the roles of cannabis? Like I've wrote an article in June about Black Lives Matter as soon as it happened with Floyd. And a lot of people did not know about the stigma within the cannabis industry, did not know anything about prohibition and the criminalization of cannabis in the 1930s. They had no idea about the scripts and the stuff that were said. They don't know anything about the Rastafari culture and the ways it's been stigmatized and the ways in terms of marginalization within Jamaica. They have no idea. But they're within these industries and they're going into these countries or going in and trying to engage, and they don't have any information. How can you accurately and equitably do that? You can't. So you need to have within corporations, there needs to be a standard of education, resources, and tools. And there's people like those of us that are on this panel that have those resources, and you can reach out to us. There's questions. If you have questions you need to ask, there is ways that you can do that. These are platforms that you can come and you can engage. It's like, Matthew, I respect the fact that you're saying you're listening, but what are you doing? At this point, there's enough history to show that this has been a problem. There's enough data to show there's a problem. What are your organizations or their organization, or we as a cannabis industry doing? Because Douglas, I know the they thing, but from yesterday, what are we doing as an industry in terms of action? I'm tired of listening. I'm tired of being angry. I'm tired of preaching. It's on Google, it's on Wikipedia. What are the actions? What are the stuff, what are we doing to be proactive at this point? I haven't seen anything. I've seen, press releases. I've seen, oh, well, we're going to put money, not you particularly, I'm not attacking you, but, we're going to be we're putting $5 billion into industry. Where's that going to? Who's standing? Where's the metrics in terms of evaluation, monitoring? Who's reporting to this? Who's reporting to me that you're doing this for my community? How do you know that the programs that you're doing are effective to my community? Are they actually addressing any of the social, environmental issues that they're facing? Are you aware of what your community is facing, the community that you're working with are facing? Because you can't, because you don't know your industry. And even with the consumer market, yes, you can be knowledgeable. Who's your consumer? Or do you know your consumers' history? Do you know how they've been interacted, how they've been victimized or marginalized throughout history? And a lot of organizations do not. They have no information. And that proved through my article, where I've gotten people messaging me saying, well, I didn't know that they had the N-word in the statements in terms of prohibition. I didn't know that they used that as a way to decriminalize cannabis in 1930s within America. So I think that at this point, it's enough listening and what are you doing and how are you going to implement it? And I think the next step for that within organizations is definitely starting by creating or having somebody designated in terms of community liaison, which can actually build a trust, because I think that's a big missing piece, is that a lot of these community groups don't trust corporations because they've had bad deals already with them, or no one's listening to them because they don't speak their language. So it's about action steps, putting in your standards within your company and saying everybody has to have this type of level of educational literacy when it comes to working within this community group. That's all I have to say.
Appreciate that, Ika.
Yeah, I love it. So I guess I'm always about the tangible, right? So there's 7 of us on this webinar, or 7 plus. We obviously aren't the problem, right? So how do we get more people to step to the table? Because I mean, I could sit here and represent, truth, right? So
yeah,
Roz, you know what we do.
We have influence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but we have influences, and so we have, the godfather of cannabis and his influence, and we have Douglas and his influence, and how do we drive people to some type of repository? The issue was with when we did more than a moment. That was the name of the event that we did, and Kim Rivers who's the CEO for True Leaf, spoke on the fact that she held herself accountable as the CEO of True Leaf. She said it starts with me. If I don't show this, and if I don't demonstrate it from the top down in regards to my hiring practices, in regards to my in regards to the support that I give to community organizations, not to the big large cannabis organizations, but at the community level. So holding herself accountable. And so we don't see enough of that, or if we do, we see people say, well, I don't know what to do. And that's why we created a repository of here's what you should be thinking about doing. And we need to be directing folks. If CanEx wants to hold I will give you all of the ideas that we came up with for corporations on how they can hold themselves responsible to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's not checkboxes, but it's different silos of opportunities, from supplier diversity to workforce development to community re-engagement. There's so many different opportunities. And like Ika said, not only what you say you're going to do, but how do you measure it? And if you don't come up in measurement, if you say, well, we're going to touch this many lives, and you don't touch that many, it's okay. All you do is take your goal of what you established for year one, figure out what happened and why you didn't meet that goal, reset that goal, and go right back at it. It doesn't happen overnight, and we realize that. And so it's just a matter of we need to take the content and take the concepts and the ideas and make them available or push them to those individuals that are running these big companies, because we are in a Me Too industry. When one company does it and drops the shoe and makes it a priority and has more people of color that are in the C-suite outside of just the CSR, like Valda. Valda is the chief marketing officer for her company. We need more Valdas out there.
I think that's great. And, one thing I'll add is that, we all have to play our part. And I think, Ika has some great points. As an investor, we invest and have positions in lots of companies. And I think that's a role we can play because, I totally agree with you. But if I invest in a company that has 1,000 employees, I don't have the ability to mandate after the fact who they hire. They run the company, they run the operations. These executives that are running these big companies make these decisions. But the role an investor can play is, as that company's being built, as you are writing the investment check, and you can bake these principles into the structure of the deal. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so if you don't do that at that moment in time, they're never going to do it later. And so
they're never going to do it.
You got to get in where you get in. And so, I want to just make that distinction for the audience because, I don't run any big companies. I run an asset management firm that we manage a lot of money, but a lot of money is in a whole lot of companies, and those people are tasked with making these decisions. So as an investor community, we've been getting together as a lot of the bigger funds, and we've been working together to try to implement these at the time we write the investment check. And so a lot of deals were done through public markets or international investment groups, mergers and acquisitions types things now, but this was offshore hedge fund money, and that was more of a banker approach. When you come top down into an emerging industry, you can have that disconnect. And so I think where you're starting to see things change now is that a lot of these asset managers, call them venture capital groups, or some call themselves private equity, but we're all pre-institutionalization. And so we're all in an emerging industry still. And so I think the influence when it comes from a finance perspective in these companies is now coming more from groups like ours. And there's a lot of us out there, you know, Steve works with a lot of them. There are some great groups that together as the top 10 or 20 funds or something like that, if we agree, we're going to do things like corporate governance. We're going to have independent boards so we can monitor how they're hiring and doing certain, you know, when you get as big as TrueLeave, people like Valda have to come in and help make sure that, you know, Kim's amazing, that things are, but when you're a 10-person company, not a 2,000-person company, or a 100-person company, how can you make that happen if the investors that are all in that deal are aligned with these types of principles? You can bake them into the deal. So I didn't want to get into like the long laundry list of checkpoints and how do you have a scoreboard. But I do want the audience to know something that's really important. You never stop listening. Never stop listening, because things change and people have a lot to say. And no matter what you look like or where you come from, you can't ever think you know the answer. You always have to listen and challenge yourself to listen to everybody, and then you have to have action. You have to have action at the same time, parallel paths, but you can never stop listening because you always want to know what is going on in the world. Those data points that are coming in, that's all you have. And you have to pay attention to them and react to them in a positive way. Like Barbara says, for God, please be a kingdom builder.
It's not only 7 of us here, you know, because there are all of us who have participated in this series. And I think what I'd like to see is I'd like CanEx, particularly out of this discussion, each of us has made at least 2 excellent points that can be put in a small Twitter post. And out of this, at least 2 points from each of the speakers go out on Twitter so they can get repeated and shared. And in fact, I'd like to see CanEx become more active on Twitter. Twitter is the best means of communication now in social media, or at least so I find it. And a lot of the really good points that have been made here today need to be shared over the next few days, just to stimulate the kind of action that Matthew is talking about. And Valda, I mean, all of you have made such great points. So let's pick them out. I don't know how much funding Douglas has to really communicate. And I know there's a website, but we all don't go to the website often, but we're always on Twitter. And there's a roll of stuff coming at us all the time. Let's throw some of our comments up on Twitter over the next couple of days. Yes, I'd like to see some.
Barbara, one thing for you that I hope makes you feel better as well. Steve D'Angelo, when people like us came into this industry, all of us on this call, and I remember my first time sitting with Steve. There are people like Steve that have been bringing this to, you know, the forefront for a long time here, that made sure we understood what you're talking about. I remember him sitting with me when I first started financing companies, and he made sure I knew. And that stuff's real. You recognize that when you come in. There are people that sit you down and try to help you understand these things. And I think, you know, we're all very thankful for that, because Steve,
very important person. I remember hearing him last year at CanEx, and I'd like to see his comments more often coming up on Twitter. He's a celebrity. He's the most important person. So I mean, CanEx has become the most important cannabis forum internationally. Other people are trying, but CanEx still stands out. Let's take it and run with it and make it do the things, the good things, all the good things we've spoken about today. Let's build that kingdom. It's ours to build. We're the builders.
Barbara, I want to say two quick things. Sorry, Valda. Is number one, Valda, we actually have a very similar perspective in that, what's the purpose of the conversation? That's where my mind goes to pretty often. I'm all about, to your point, Matt, listening, but then to what end, right? That's very important to me and how I'm programmed. And what I will say is this: what I have learned in my short 5-year, but as you said earlier, Matt, in dog years, I'm a veteran of cannabis, okay? But it is through conversations with people like Steve. I'll never forget, I was in Colombia and heard Steve speak. And, thankfully for me, usually I can say to somebody, I'd like to meet that individual, I'd like to meet that person, or who can I connect to talk to whomever. And when Steve was finished speaking, I made a beeline for Steve, because I'm like, he has the heritage, he's put in the work, but he also speaks with the authenticity and the passion, right? So his accomplishments stand on their own 2 feet, his business accomplishments and so on and so forth. But that real authentic sense of this is why this journey is important, I have come to understand on my path. And I say it, I say it as I speak in different forum, right? Is that if you don't have a true authentic sense of why you're doing this and understand the plan, you're dead in the water. I don't care how much money you start with. I don't care how smart you are. I don't have, care about the brain trust around you. You're dead in the water because it starts with that. So my first point is this: I would love to take away from this, because we talk about accountability. And maybe one of the things CanEx can do is look around and start to build a very simplistic scorecard to say, these are the companies whose words match their actions. These are the companies that are saying, we should do better, we should be socially oriented and motivated. And maybe whether it's through Twitter or Instagram or whichever social media platform or otherwise communication forum, we can take a stand, Barbara, of maybe just being at least a voice to try to reinforce or project what's actually taking place, right, in the context of the community, and hopefully with a view toward some companies saying, I don't want to be on that list. I don't want to have a grade of D in terms of these values, because we need to be doing better. Because, Matt, I'll just say to your point, I think there are a lot of companies whose leadership want to do the right thing, but the leadership does not implement. And so a lot of times, sometimes, while they have these values and these priorities, they can be slipping up in number 5 or number 7 or number 8, which might be to say, let's have a more diverse look and feel for our organization. But number 1 through number 5 is what their feet are being held to the fire for, which is their performance, their metrics and so forth. And the other things are what they would like to accomplish, but they're one person. So if we can put a score sheet, or we can publicize in a way that says, here's what's going on, and it can actually lead to somebody in leadership who wants to see a change, being able to say, why are we so low on this list? You know what I mean? And now it becomes more of a priority for someone whose job it is to make that happen. Maybe that's a way of pulling together the ideas, the brain trust, the core sensibility that we're hearing here from a truly diverse set of people. I mean, this is really remarkable just on this panel, the different disciplines and geographic locations and experiences that we're pulling together here. But I will say that that's something that we will take on. I don't know how exactly yet, but I will commit to at least moving that forward and reaching out to you guys to see how best we can shape that. The second thing I wanted to say, and
sorry,
go ahead.
No, I was going to say I had my.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
You go, Ross. You go.
No, I was just going to say that one of the documents that, Ms. Barbara is correct, and one of the documents I just had my assistant send over to you is the More Than a Moment. The list is basically, here's your action item of, so Matt, if you have a corporation right now, I know that you're a funder, but you may have corporations where you have just relationships with, and you just say, hey, listen, are you guys looking to really shore up your diversity and equity and inclusion within your corporation? Here's a action item list of things that you can start thinking about. And so I just shifted over to you, Douglas. Steve, I have your email address, but we'll make sure if you want to forward it to Matthew and Valda and Ika. It's a great starting point. There's a huge list of items that corporations can start looking at, and I think it'll help the conversation that you're talking about here.
Awesome. And then the second thing that I wanted to say, and again, I've evolved as a human being, so I believe now that everything happens for a reason versus thinking I have to make everything happen regardless, right? We had such an amazing conversation yesterday between Steve and Firstman, because again, moving from the theoretical to what could we practically do to demonstrate some of what we're talking about here and put it in motion in a way that could be recognized and scalable into other jurisdictions. And I don't want to preempt that conversation, because the truth of it is Steve and Firstman representing it. And Steve, I'm not putting you on the spot, but if you're happy to talk about it a little bit, or Firstman, if your sound comes back in and you want to start that, I personally feel it would be fantastic for us to share with our audience here today. And what that spoke to is, this is a broad issue. Diversity and inclusion, it's really not that complicated. But when you talk about it in the American context, or the North American context, if you will, there's so many different pieces at play. Whether this is a true step because I'm saying I need a person of this caliber, or this is someone I'm just going to put in a box, like we've heard in a bunch of tech companies, and say, listen, I just need you for the window dressing. We really don't need you to say much. Just sit over there and we'll call you when we need you to come and take some photographs, right? Which is not what we want. But what Steve and Firstman were talking about was something that I think allowed us to embrace, as you say, Barbara, the importance of Jamaica, the significance of a market like Jamaica. And to some degree, the perceived easy, homogeneous nature of Jamaica, right? And say, this is what we're going to do. But what it actually would lead to was something that actually could roll out globally, that was authentic, that was representative, that was also, inherently respectful, right, Steve, of the culture, and therefore was also going to be very, very visionary and pioneering as far as how do we move the needle on diversity and equity discussions in a way that has real results for the people that participate. So I don't know if I'm putting you, Firstman, and Steve on the spot, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Welcome back, Firstman.
well, listen, I am just going to speak now because I'm not sure if I'll be able to do so again based on how the internet is behaving, yes? So I just wanted to jump a little in front of Steve there. Sorry, my brother Steve, we'll have to talk about this at another time. But anyways, concerning that which Douglas is saying, I wanted to just go forward to all that I've heard so far, where it seems as if companies are ready, communities may not necessarily be ready. If communities are ready, governments may not necessarily be ready. So we want to see if we can identify the right diagnosis. That's what is the real problem, so we can also have the right solutions. And I think that's what I'm hearing out of this conversation. Funding is an issue, but if there's funding, community, knowledge is an issue. So if we can just basically get what the issues really are, because in facing this from a real standpoint, looking at the work that needs to be done, and start to do the work, you recognize that sometimes once you're making that move, you don't need to be right or wrong.
Firstman, you're killing me, my friend. You're killing me. What internet are you on? Dial-up? You're dropping out completely, Firstman, unfortunately.
Realize that we're doing something that we have never done before. We're going to be having saying all right.
Now I can hear you.
I'm not doing well with the internet.
No worries. Steve, can you
we
go ahead,
recognize that
Firstman?
we're all involved.
Firstman? Hello? Bueller?
Yeah, as
Bueller?
we recognize that we're doing something, identify the players who agrees.
All right. Firstman, I'm gonna ask Steve. I'm gonna ask Steve to jump in here because you're in and out, so it's really difficult to follow you, unfortunately. But Steve, I mean, I don't know if you're comfortable.
Yeah, man. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, Steve. You know, your thoughts.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. I think that Firstman and I were talking about an idea that sort of breaks down into three buckets. The first is a goal, the second is a vehicle, and the third is a process, but the process actually has to come first. The goal, right, is to figure out how to get some portion of the vast amount of money that's being created by the legal cannabis industry, which is expanding everywhere in the world right now, back to the communities that have carried this plant through the darkness of prohibition, like the Rastafarian communities of Jamaica and other places around the world. But how to do that in a way that is ethical and consistent with the lessons that the plant teaches us. So that's the goal. The vehicle is to imagine what Firstman would call a stand, but what the corporate world calls a brand, that could be deployed across the world in many multiple different markets that would supply a compelling story and a compelling reason that the corporate world mostly lacks, right? And so there's some significant portion of that money will flow back to the communities whose story is being told. So imagine, for example, and this gets into process. And so what Firstman and I are talking about doing first is to engage the Rastafarian community in Jamaica in a reasoning, right? In a conversation within the community to think about this nexus between our sacrament and the commodification, the commodity market for cannabis. How do we ourselves structure that interface so that we remain true to our ideals, that we remain true to the lessons that the plant has taught us? And that has to be the first part of the conversation, and do that reasoning and figuring it out. I have this one idea of a stand or a brand that could basically stand for social justice, could tell the stories of the Rastafarian communities, maybe other communities. There's many other traditional and indigenous communities that have carried this plant through prohibition, who are also suffering, who also need a mechanism to get some of this vast amount of money that's being generated into the hands of the communities that really suffered, that really carried this plant through those dark years. But it's just one idea. And so first, we have to sit down and reason amongst ourselves and come to a degree of comfort with the way that we approach this. Then we need to figure out what the right vehicle is to accomplish the goal. And then we get in and we drive the vehicle in the right direction.
Love that. Like first three steps, that's perfect. That's the platform, that's the way forward to concretize those three and publicize those three objectives and package that together in a proper PR program. That would be very effective to achieve the goals we have discussed here today. And I offer my services in any way to help you do that.
I love the idea of telling the stories, right? And I also say making the case. There was a question, I think Lincoln asked it, about, how sort of the grassroots and corporate may inherently distrust each other, right? And even bringing them together, sometimes you can't move forward with action. But I think if in addition, Douglas, to the scorecard, which I thought was a brilliant idea, maybe some small case studies, examples, stories, whatever you want to call them, right? Of various size companies that are doing it. I
Well,
think
can I ask
show,
what are
show
some
the
things?
success.
Can I ask what are some things just TrueLeave is doing? I mean, you guys are really leading the way, and can you share any of those initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, I think it started at the top, right? So to what Roz said, we happen to have a CEO that's about it. And so when she makes the commitment, she honors it, right? I was hired. There's several other people of color that are hired, but you know, as I put in one of my responses, everyone that looks alike doesn't always have the same politics or worldview, right? So it's not only about having the diversity, the representation, but it's also about the actions of those people. When the George Floyd incident happened, Black Lives Matter, we not only put out a statement, but I literally got on Facebook Live. So I put my personal self out there on behalf of the company to talk about those issues and how it feels, right? To be someone who's Black or brown and see all of those things happening, and why, you know, as a company, we stand behind Black lives beyond just a words on a page, very safe statement, right? Maybe not so safe to some, but when you see a person that represents the leadership of the company actually come out there and publicly stand in front and say, you know, yes, we stand for it, and I'm putting my name behind it. I think the other thing too is we have a large community engagement team. And so from the start of TrueLeave, you know, there were relationships even before I joined the organization a year ago. There were relationships that were formed. I mean, the way that we go about what we do is that we try to become a part of the community, both in financial support, in you know, actual events and presence, right, with the community where we operate. We recognize we're not just a business there, right? People are driving past, walking past all the time, and the people coming in tell us their stories of healing or of pain and of need, and that goes beyond the need for the medicine. You know, when COVID hit, for example, we have relationships with so many nonprofit organizations. We gave them the platform of our social channels to share how people can get meals, you know, how they can get financial assistance and all of those things at a time when people were being furloughed, losing their jobs, et cetera. So I think it's, you know, I don't want to make this about TrueLeave at all, but I just think that we are probably one company that's a good example, but I would love to see smaller companies, right? People who, entrepreneurs who started. I really think telling the stories, and maybe Douglas CanEx's website or what have you is the place that all of that is stored, but tell the stories of the entrepreneurs, of the ones that are making it, that got access to capital. They can share their example of how they did it. You know, and if there are larger companies such as TrueLeave that are also doing it, you know, showcase that as well, showcase the partnerships. I just think that the more we show people it's possible and that it's happened, the more people will believe it.
Yeah.
Right? And within showing them that it's possible and that it's happened, giving them some of the steps towards that. Right. And Roz, I saw you've been responding and you've been giving people resources, right? Hey, if you need information on this, go here. It's that type of thing.
Yeah. I think it's also important to say that you don't have to be a TrueLeave. TrueLeave is definitely a large corporation with 2,000 employees and has resources that are inherent to being that big. But you don't have to be a large. There are different levels to engagement into diversity and inclusion. And sometimes, again, I just want to just put it out there, it's not always the money. It is the expertise. Imagine if you were a cannabis operator. You may be small, but you've been in the marketplace for 2 to 3 years. The level of experience and the level that you've gained that trumps someone that's brand new, that could be a social equity operator trying to first come into the marketplace. You're not necessarily having to give money, but imagine if you gave mentoring, maybe if you gave resources, maybe if there was sharing of content, of information, how you could really just shorten that learning curve and help them to get into the marketplace. I will tell you, I live in Florida, and one of the biggest tragedies that is going on in Florida right now, and everyone knows how I feel about it, is in 2017, the state of Florida opened up the marketplace and said, hey, we're going to bring these license holders into the state of Florida, and you're going to get a vertical license. And that means you can process, you can cultivate, you can have your dispensaries, you can deliver the whole 9 yards. Well, they promised one license to a Black farmer. Do you guys know that one Black farmer license has yet to be awarded, and it's been almost 2.5 years since that point, since that legislation was created? So imagine if you are the Black farmer that maybe 3 years from now eventually gets that license, how you are that much further behind the 8 ball. This is the reality of policy, the reality that's going on state by state. And this is why when we have organizations and companies that if you are ahead, if you're at that mile marker, if you're running 26 miles and you started, you know, you're at 16-mile mark and I'm just starting at 1, there needs to be some type of commitment or responsibility to say, you know what, let me go back and reach back and let me bring you on up to where I am. So those are the opportunities that I think this conversation presents itself.
And I guess what I'll add is the fact that, like, I've worked with organizations that have over 40,000 staff members. And right now they're working towards a shift of trying to understand in terms of services. So I work mostly in public health and healthcare in terms of working with hospitals. And in terms of diversity in the communities that they face, they've been coming up with organizational competencies, because I feel like within organizations, and I say that, and it may just seem like a term, but when you have competencies and when you have standards in set, that is where accountability comes into play. Because then you can say, okay, well, everyone needs to follow these guidelines, but especially leadership needs to follow these guidelines. This is what, you know, frontline staff have to focus on. This is what you do individually in terms of the people that you're going towards. So even for myself, I'm in Canada, sorry. So I don't think I said that, but I'm based in Canada. And I'm seeing these organizations here based in Canada that have, I'm not really familiar, Valda, with your company, but I know that a lot of these companies, even when I was working with one of the big LPs there, it was tokenism. I was the only Black woman or Black person at the time in the office. And it was always turning to me saying, so what do Jamaicans want? And I'm like, well, guess what? I was born in Canada, so I'm sometimes feel very far removed from the Jamaican culture. But even then, I don't know, Jamaica has how many people over, you know, diasporic and within the community? I don't know. I can't speak to Rasta culture as well, because I'm not Rasta, you know, and I just, you know, it's like, so what do Black people want? I don't know. I know what I want. I know what maybe my community in terms of who I interact with want. So it's, and I guess that's the thing when you do metrics sometimes, or you're hitting quotas, because I think there's a question as well, is that aspect where it's counterintuitive, because you start going into tokenism, where you have, okay, I'm going to have 5 Black people. I'm going to have, you know, 5 people that are brown. I'm going to have 5 Asian, wow, you know, community. So it's going to be one of those things where it's like, you know, you turn to those people in the room and you're saying, so what do your community want? We're going to do this for your community. So I think that's something that people need to recognize as well when they're doing diversity work or trying to implement diversity, inclusion, and equity within their company, is that you need to realize that your work may be counterintuitive once you start going into tokenism. And that creates an unsafe space for people of colors, Indigenous, and Blacks as well. So.
Powerful, Ika. And that's wonderful. And what I would even say again is another potential takeaway from this discussion is, you know, Roz, you guys at Minorities for Medical Marijuana, there's so many great programs that you have, like training programs. And sure, one of the things I've seen in my 5 years here in Jamaica, and even talking to small farmers or people who want to, you know, meet different folks who come down for CanEx, and Ike made this point yesterday, there's a lack of the team is not fully well-rounded. You know what I mean? There's someone who knows how to cultivate, and there's someone who's there to help them administratively, but they don't have a legal expertise. They don't have a financial expertise. And some of these gaps are what prevent having a more fulsome conversation with a prospective investor. Because, you know, to Matt and Steve, you gotta have a full bench for someone, especially in a startup. It's a different risk profile. So some of those gaps in an organization that's been humming along, and you can sort of say, wow, they've shown fantastic resilience, or they've developed this line really, really well. They could use a little bit stronger this and a little stronger that. You know, you're sort of tweaking something that's in motion of how it can be better, you know, with some financial sort of fire to go behind it. But when you're starting up, you know, especially in today's world, especially what's happened with cannabis, where it's not free money anymore. You know, people are a lot more circumspect to say, do they have the full team? And I would, so my challenge or comment here, Roz and Ika, is twofold. One is, Roz, let's have a look at your programs, right? And Ika, let's have a conversation around, you know, what some of those gaps are that you typically see from folks who are looking for funding that they don't have. And then let's involve Matt and Steve, because of their perspectives and experience and expertise in seeing some of these deals from both sides, and better understand how we could maybe give a sort of like, you know, a 101 course that someone could download to sort of say, have you answered these questions? So just like Matt talks about a checklist with ESG, you know, you want to go look for funding, here's a checklist for you. Can you check these questions before you get in a room with a prospective investor? And if you have a knowledge gap, what can you do to fill it?
Well, what you're talking about, Douglas, is really the accelerator program for businesses outside of just doing a one-off, like a webinar or what have you. We really, if you could be able to, and that costs money. And this is what I'm talking about when I just had a conversation we were talking about yesterday, and after I was on with you guys, talking about the scarcity of resources for nonprofits that are servicing at the community level. So Infra-MM is a 501c3 nonprofit for all those who want to know, and we service at the community level. So what we're doing is we're interacting with the individuals who have been incarcerated, family members have been incarcerated, minority-owned businesses who want to enter the industry, people that want more education. We're breaking the stigma. And with all of that being said, you got to get resources to be able to put on programming. The things that we do just didn't happen by osmosis. It was a lot of hard work, but we worked so much harder to do so much. And imagine if we had just a little bit more resources. And so it's just you know, when you talk about what we should do, an accelerator program, and I'm hoping in the next month, I may be able to announce that we have a partner who's going to come on board and help support an accelerator program, would match up what Ika is saying and saying, okay, here's where we see the gap. We have the businesses that are coming through the program. It's a 6 or 8 week program, and they're being able to have intentional resources and put in place to help them shore up that gap. And if we can help them shore up that gap, they may be ready for an angel investor. They may be ready for an institutional investor, like where Matthew and his group comes from. But we need to put something around these organizations and these businesses to help them understand where they fit or where they are right now, and how to bridge and help them be successful, and to also measure what we're doing to make sure that what we're putting out there is really having a positive effect.
Roz, I want to ask a little bit more on that. Is it, okay, where is the expertise coming from? Is it from volunteering? So people who have the expertise volunteering their time, or is it partnered with colleges or, you know, local colleges, university? How are they getting that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So right now, a lot of our, we do these boot camps that have been, and they were sponsored by, a lot of our boot camps were sponsored by TrueLeave. And I will be honest with you, and I have been working with TrueLeave since 2017 and working with their CEO, and she's seen the vision of what we put on. So some of those resources have allowed us to hire people, but a lot of times we get individuals who have a subject matter expert, like Jessica Gonzalez. She's a cannabis attorney. Do you guys realize that even with some of our smaller businesses, just the business basics 101, business formation, how to find your accountant, some of the basic things that you need to have in order to go to the next step, those foundational things are not there. So when you're going, it's almost like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. The state of Illinois says we're going to have all these social equity licenses, and you are a business and you're like, okay, I want this opportunity, and you're fighting to get in, but you don't even know what the requirements are. You don't even know just how to position yourself to be able to get that winning ticket. And so that was why we did the boot camps. And really at this point, our boot camps are very specific to applying for a license. But the beautiful thing about cannabis is that you could be an operator that touches plants, but the opportunity on the ancillary side is just as nice. I mean, Matt, I don't know if you want to talk about businesses that you finance on that you guys invest in on the ancillary side. But we have a guy right now, shout out to Ovid Smith and tetragramapp.com. He's in our accelerator right now. So I don't get anything from it. I'm just promoting this brother, but he has a technology, a SaaS platform that he built out for the cannabis industry. So he's in our accelerator. So my job right now is to help him understand, to help him with resources, to help put a light on his app and what he's doing. And there's some beautiful cannabis brands that are coming from our community that are not touching a plant, that really want to have a viable opportunity. And so that's where we can have these industry and experts come in and help them basically reduce some of the barriers and the time it takes to get to marketplace.
Look, folks, this is fascinating and it's awesome. And we've been very, very as we've done the webinars, we've really tried to start them all on time and end them all on time. We're already 15 minutes over, just because the flow of the conversation. And so it's really from that perspective that I kind of want to be, I'll sort of wrap it up, because again, I'm super mindful that the folks who give us their time, they want great takeaways. We provide them with wonderful knowledge, but we do it in a sort of disciplined manner. So I'm going to ask everyone just for their sort of final comments on this. But Roz, what I do want to actually follow up on as well is looking at that accelerated program, where it leaves the person at the end, like what that skill level looks like. And then Steve and Matt, I'm gonna take that, come back to you guys and ask you honestly, how at that stage, how ready are they for what type of investor presentation? So whether it's an ESG, whether it's an angel, whether you still see massive gaps there that are missing before they can have those sort of conversations. Then Roz, maybe I can come back to you and we can see what's necessary to at least put them in the game. I will also second that app, that Tetragram app. I spoke to the young man and I think it's a fantastic thing. I think his story is really interesting. So anyway, final comments from everybody before we wrap.
I'd love to say that the most impressive thing I come out of this seminar with is the comment that Steve made about the 3-step process. I think that's really important. Finding a process, a brand, and a vehicle. And the process really it's a combination of what Matthew recommends, what Roz is talking about, all the training systems that could be implemented. The brand could be a fund, an organization to which all cannabis companies could be persuaded and encouraged to contribute as part of, out of their profits, to support the indigenous communities that out of which cannabis has come globally, and provide systems that could encourage them to be strong, to be strengthened. And then the vehicle to put it forward, that's the PR communications tool that will get it there. I mean, what is it going to be? A reggae concert every year in a different part of the world, a real social media campaign. We don't know what it is, but that 3-step process is very important. And the people in this seminar that heard what Firstman had to say yesterday in the conversation with Steve as well. So it's all here, ready to be put together in a nice package, Douglas. And I've really gained from a lot of knowledge from being in this seminar. I want to also say we won't meet again this year, 2020. And in fact, I celebrate Christmas January 17th as an Orthodox, so I won't even say Merry Christmas to you all yet, but it's been wonderful being part of this series this year. I've gained a lot and I look forward to next year's CanEx webinar series. Thank you very much. It was lovely to be here. Jah bless, Jah love.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, I guess I'll call Aika. Your final comments.
I guess my only comment would be definitely just be aware that there are ways to get things done. And then there's people and resources that are there. There's examples, like Valda said. I was actually really impressed by the stats, so commendable for you guys in terms of what you're doing. But there's a lot of different ways, and there's resources out there. Don't feel like there's nothing there. There's people you can reach out to. I'm here to help as well and offer my advice. And I'm looking forward to seeing where the cannabis industry goes. And again, I'm always here in terms of advice.
Awesome, thank you. Matt, your final thoughts?
Oh, well, I'm just feeling empowered and encouraged personally. And I think for Arcadian as a firm, I want to speak for all my team members and just try to, I guess, leave the conversation with a word called collaborate. And I think the plant does that for us. I think we are constantly trying to achieve homeostasis and balance and peace. And so I think that's the spirit of this industry. And I think if we work together, the stronger we're going to be is going to be by doing it as a team. And I think we're at Arcadian so fortunate to try to play a role. And if we can be helpful to you guys that are listening, arcadiancap.com is our website. I can promise you that we will always listen and we'll always be there to do our best and play our role in the sacrament being in more places, because that's our goal. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Valda, your final thoughts?
I'll just share, I put it in the comments. I'll start with just on it's possible for this to be real, right? So TrueLeave has 42% of our employees are minorities and 17% in leadership roles. So I am not the only one. Thankful to not be a token, because I have been in other places. But I guess for me, I think everyone who's already engaged in this webinar, either as a panelist or listening and asking questions, has already taken a really important step. And I think the connection and keeping connected is probably what's the most important thing. So hopefully, not hopefully, I'm sure, Douglas, that CanEx will continue to be a vehicle for everyone to remain connected. I say be clear on the ask, whatever your need is, and I'm sure coming to this group that you can get the resources that you need to move forward. So it's nothing but positivity going forward. And I'm happy to collaborate and help, as we continue to build. Awesome.
And Valda, I just have to say those are really impressive numbers. For a company of TrueLeave's size to be doing that, it's really heartening to hear that the actions, I wouldn't even say match the words. I think the actions outperform the words in this case. So I hope more companies take that on board, and in the spirit of competition, they look for ways to outdo what you guys are already doing. And I think that's really the way that we uplift, and take away from this conversation the real tangible outcomes that change lives and change perspectives. So great job to you guys for that.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Absolutely.
And we're profitable. So that was my whole point in answering the questions was, it is absolutely possible to do good, to do what's right for people and for our world, right? The earth, and be profitable. Right. We're not the only one that can show that example, but we are one in cannabis.
And one final correction I think we need to make. A few times some of us here said, TrueLeave had 2,000 employees, and that's actually 4,000 apparently based on what they said. So again, it paints those numbers in an even more impressive light. Absolutely. Roz, your final thoughts?
Yeah, and the other thing, just TrueLeave is definitely one of my faves, and just to let you guys know that they exist in a majority minority community. So I can't explain to you how important it is to put your corporation, to put your headquarters, your plant in a county that's a minority county. That right there creates the opportunity that you see in those numbers. And so, Valda, I didn't want to take that away from you, but I wanted to share that because it's so true and so important to the history of that company. And I would just say to folks out there, when you're looking to create a company, when you're looking to do a manufacturing plant, processing plant, look to those communities that need that economic uplift, that have workforce issues, that have the opportunity for you to increase the tax base in that county or that local municipality. Douglas, thank you for having me on. You guys know I get really passionate about what I do. I've been, I founded M4MM 5 years ago and running the organization. We currently have 27 chapters and three international chapters and 2 HBCU chapters of the organization. I work tirelessly, and I just want you guys to know that I'm an open sponge. I don't know it all. I don't profess to know it all. I just have a heart that believes that someone has to create an umbrella that's going to make it comfortable and make it, if you give people the vision and the opportunity and just give them a taste of what the opportunity may present itself and help them walk through the process and do it from a place of good spirit and from the heart, I think people will thrive and they will take off, and they just want time and attention. They want someone to feel like they want to know that someone cares. And so the organization, we care, and we just thank you guys for having us on. Go to our website, learn more about the things that we've done. But if you want to lend a hand and help us and figure out how to tweak some of our programming or how to work together and how to kind of create collaboration together, we're all about it. So thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely. And Roz, again, I want to commend you for the incredible job that you've done and continue to do. M for MM, I think, needs to be shouted and celebrated more. And I can tell you, as much as 2020 has been a challenging year in so many respects for all of us, me included, one of my real highlights is the honor of, you inviting me to sit on the board of M for MM. And, I'm not want to run around and accumulate, awards or whatever, but it's a true sense of responsibility that I hope to give back to the organization in bringing something positive. So, hats off to you and the team and what you've done to this point. And I hope that as things move forward, M for MM can kick on to much bigger things and really sort of, benefit to be able to help more people from this fantastic foundation that you've already laid. Steve, I'm going to ask you to sort of take us home, if you will, with the final thoughts. From my perspective, Valda said earlier, actually we've said here earlier a number of times that, Matt used the word collaboration. And I just want to say to anybody on this who's relatively new to the industry, what you'll find that's very different about the cannabis industry in its spirit is people are willing to help you. People are willing to give advice, give time, give perspective, connect you with folks. One piece of advice I will give is what Valda said, which is try to be as specific with your request as possible. You know what I mean? So people can really help. And I'm leading this into Steve because, Steve, again, when I first heard you speak, and then I sort of looked up your cannabis pedigree, if you will, what struck me is your consistency and your humility in who you spoke to, what you spoke about, and your willingness to lend support and perspective and guidance and help. And, in so many ways, at its simplest form, I think that's what makes this industry so special. And I think that's what makes you such an important leader, and your legacy so incredibly important in what you've done to date. So, as an individual who's benefited from it, amongst so many others, I thank you for it. And, appreciate all that you've done to help take us forward. But, as you know, and you continue to work, it's not over yet. It's still a long way to go. And I salute the fact that you continue to be in the trenches every single day, trying to do your very best to keep moving us forward. So, we'd love to hear your final words before we sign off today.
Well, thanks so much for that kind appreciation and all the other words of appreciation that my fellow panelists have offered. I just try to do my best to walk a path that's consistent with the lessons and the values that the cannabis plant has taught me. I've really been honored to be a part of this conversation. I've learned something from each of you here today. I think that the whole conversation really, for me, highlights a couple of things, right? One is this really beautiful and amazing quality of cannabis to bring so many different kinds of people together. And it's something that the world needs so much today. And I see cannabis doing it everywhere. But when we are come together, right, we all do come from these very different backgrounds and places and races and income and professional experience. Right? And so we now have the opportunity and the challenge of having these conversations that cannabis has facilitated. And I think really when I stand back and I look at the cosmic purpose of cannabis, the spiritual purpose of it, here we are in this world, which is at each other's throats. You see more and more war and hatred, refugees all over the world, young people who are so dismayed with life that they compete with each other to find more ridiculous and crazy ways to kill themselves. If there was ever a time that the world needed a plant that brings people together and facilitates the kind of sometimes difficult conversations that we're going to have with each other, that time is now, and that plant is cannabis.
Well, everyone, thank you so very much, for being a part of this, to our panelists first. Second, absolutely to those of you who've tuned in and joined us today, and those who will watch this on the recording thereafter, and to my incredible team who do so much work and making what we present so professional and so well put together, and really making me look a lot better than I should. But I appreciate all that you do. And in terms of messages of celebration, we've all talked about the webinar series and how it will continue to 2021. Barbara, thank you. But what I'm excited to announce is that we have set our dates for CanEx Jamaica physical, like let's get together as people again, of September 23 to 25 next year here in Montego Bay. And we're just absolutely super excited to put that out there and really, continue these webinar conversations, yes, because I think they're very informative, educational, and revealing, but just to all be able to get back together again. So I look forward to having all our wonderful panelists here with us next year in person, participating as in the past, and to look to shape it with our team to be bigger and better, and again allow us to be very appreciative of that privilege of being back together as human beings. So I wish everyone a wonderful season whenever you celebrate. I celebrate Christmas, so I always say Merry Christmas, but whatever way you celebrate, I hope you and your family can really take from this the gratitude and the wonderful blessings, even in the context of a difficult year, because what we have to realize is so very many people have had it so much tougher. And hopefully that will allow us to be a little bit more grateful for what we do have. So I thank you all again, and I wish you the most wonderful few weeks till the end of this most memorable of years. Thank you.